both feet as opposed to our conversation last time?
Yeah, I mean, it's been exactly a year since I was on your show. In last 1 year, we made a lot of progress with the startup accelerator EFI Hub. So as you know, we already started with Rwanda. We were mentoring businesses in Rwanda. We moved to Kenya, Nigeria, Africa. We predominantly worked with startups in the tech space, fintech, e-commerce, education, and we did a bit of a social impact, mentored social impact businesses as well. In addition, we also worked with government officials and government intermediaries in West and South of Africa, basically working with them on identifying the gaps in the investment policy infrastructure and see how they can sort of enhance the policy environment such that a lot of investors from Western market like US, Europe, or Eastern market like China and come and invest directly in these startups. So this was the kind of space that we were operating in for about a year. And, we understood, we worked with businesses, we understood that as much as we can sit down and mentor them, we can like give them a lot of ideas or help them scale, etc. Everything gets stuck at the funding phase. Funding is very predominant in the success of a startup. And, with that sort of a thought process, we realized that why not ourselves get into the investment space? Why not have our own investment arm to EFI Hub, which we intend to call EFI Capital, and then support the businesses in all the ways. So that's been our journey so far.
Right. In regards to what kind of startups you've been taking up, we were talking about it last week where we could package any particular startup or any industry and make money out of it or make it lucrative. But you're bullish on fintech and e-commerce in Africa. You've had your research done on the same to decide to focus on this too, but we'd like to hear why.
Yeah, so if you look at, so first and foremost, the fundamentals in Africa are very strong. You have a very young population. Mobile penetration is very strong. It's on a rise. Social media consumption is on a rise. Banking penetration in the region is only 17%. And if you look at similar examples, I think one of the models that we follow is China. China had the same thing. Banking penetration was high, but then there was no digital banking platforms, no financial inclusion from the digital point of view. And with Alibaba and stuff coming in with their own payment channel, it was totally disruptive in the market. And this is like a whole multi-billion-dollar industry that they established for themselves. We see the same sort of story that can be carried further to Africa. Like I mentioned, you have strong fundamentals in place, young population, very adaptive, very strong consumer growth. M-Pesa is a success story of Kenya, which was replicated across Africa. And you know the kind of growth that this sort of segment has had in past couple of years. So that's one reason why we think it is very important for us to be in that space. Another is if you look at the investments in fintech in 2017, by the end of 2017, approximately 560 million was invested in VC investment in Africa, 1/3 of which was in fintech space. And it is a very interesting trend because in the previous years, when you're looking at fintech offtake, you look at Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. But if you see the research which is done by Partech Ventures and Quartz and Disrupt Africa and stuff, you see that this is like a whole wave. So you have a lot of US investments, which is made in sub-Saharan Africa and getting bullish on Ghana, getting bullish on Egypt, Francophone. 10% of your investments in the fintech space was in the Francophone region. All of these are very positive factors. A lot of startups, Branch, Flutterware, Paywave, Cellulant, these kind of startups have raised, double-digit $1 million from the US investors. Like Cellulant recently raised Series C for $45 million from TP, which is a US-based private equity fund. The entire world is actually looking at Africa in a very positive way. They're very confident that this is the growth wave that they all want to ride on, especially from the VC and private equity perspective.
Right, Anu, for the interest of time, I have to ask you one last question. So you've talked about what you're focusing on as EFI Hub or the capital itself, but what do your investors think about what you've decided to focus on? You have them from US, China, African, British, of Indian origin. What do they think about the kind of bucket that you're trying to put together?
I think they're very interested in this market. A lot of people, if you see the US market is getting quickly saturated. There are a lot of private equity players, VC players, assets are overvalued. China is currently deleveraging, tightening the leverage levers and stuff like that. So they think Africa has a lot of potential. You can go into the market, you can quickly scale up the business, and they see it as a very, very interesting space. They want to be the early divers in this market. So they're very confident. They're very bullish about their tech investments in Africa, especially in the space of fintech, e-commerce, health tech, like Health and stuff. And we pretty much will be riding on the same wave. And this is the kind of sectors that we will be focusing on predominantly.
But we won't see the momentum on Mergims, for example, the scaling aspect of it. We won't see it subside, will we?
Sorry?
For Mergims, for example, you've had a heavy hand in Mergims, and you intend to see it scale. We won't see those efforts subside.
Well, I mean, we are very bullish on Mergims right from day one. And if you looked at and tracked Mergims' progress, they did a fantastic job in Rwanda, and they're currently working on expanding in other East African markets. If you remember last time when I was on your show, I think I was with Maggie, and I had mentioned that to scale is very important. So to be present in across East African belt like Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya is very key. And Mergims is pretty much on the same line. So they are expanding their footprint. They are moving to Kenya, and that'll be like the second best bet after Rwanda, after having pilot tested in this market. And as our first investment, we will be zeroing down on Mergims.